Welcome to the Payment Shed podcast, the weekly podcast that dives into the big topics, trends, and people shaping the worlds of payments, fintech, and business leadership. With your two co-hosts, myself, Grant Evans, and Justin Hanna. Ranjita, please introduce yourself. Tell us about your role at Mastercard.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. So I run services for North America, and as we were talking before, that's a broad term, but it includes all of our safety and security assets, all of our engagement, digital engagement assets, so our loyalty programs and things like that, and also all of our data analytics assets, so all of the insights that we get from our data. So it's a broad set of capabilities that enhances the value of payments.
Brilliant. And we really want to dive into cybersecurity with you today and how that kind of threat has evolved, specifically payment side, but also with the schemes at the moment. So I just wanted to get your initial take on how that has changed in recent years.
Yeah, so I've been in cybersecurity and fraud for maybe close to 2 decades now, so it's a long time. And I can tell you that there are 3 major things that have changed over the last several years, I would say. One is more data and an expanding threat surface, right? So think about all the data that we produce in a day. And apparently I was reading a recent stat, it's 2.5 quintillion bytes of data that a user, that the planet is generating every day. And that is 10 to the power of 18, in case you wanted to know. It's a lot of data. So it's increasing the threat surface a lot because of a lot of data, a lot of interactions, a lot of channels, right? Digital channels. The number 2 is that now cybercrime is industrialized, right? So it is no longer the guy in the basement or the girl in the basement. The Nigerian prince is long gone. This is industrialized crime. They're running it like a business. And the third one I would say is technology. So just as much as we're excited about AI and we're excited about all the great things we can do with it, it's also enabling the fraudsters, right? So they're using AI to perpetrate attacks at scale, completely automated. So you can get fake sites, millions of them at scale, which people find it hard to shut them down before they can perpetrate fraud. And it's coming from all channels, social platforms, everything. So automation, and they're using technologies like deepfakes. So with the technology and the fact that now we have as-a-service models, even in the crime side, so ransomware-as-a-service, fraud-as-a-service, that technology angle, they're using it as well for their endeavors.
So they're operating almost like businesses in their own right.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a really interesting topic. I think the attackers being more organized and using AI in particular, how do you guys try and monitor and get ahead of that as a scheme?
Yeah, so we're constantly looking for patterns. So I would say because it's automated and it's AI driven, we have been employing AI for decades, actually,
to monitor transactions, right? So protecting transactions, identifying anomalies, identifying patterns that just don't look quite right. And so you have to kind of use AI to combat AI, right? So, and then on top of that, you also have to think about things like threat intelligence, because there's a lot out there that's available on the dark web and other sources, open web, etc. Kind of always monitoring at the portfolio level, looking at what kind of malware and what kind of other vulnerabilities are out there that might be impacting our customers, and then getting the signals from that and sharing that with the ecosystem. That is what's going to help us to kind of stay ahead of this.
Does the sheer volume of data that you guys have at your fingertips help you in that defense?
Absolutely. Yep. The amount of data that we have absolutely helps. But one thing I will caution is to get the signal out of the data is really important, right? So it's like sometimes it can be like fraud can be like, or cyber attacks can be like looking for a needle in a haystack. So being able to get that right signal requires a lot of machine learning, a lot of artificial intelligence, and a lot of scale, right? I would say a lot of compute power at scale is what you need to be able to get that signal from that mass of data, because there's a lot of it out there, to your point.
It's a huge game of cat and mouse, right? Just
Yep.
as you think you're getting there, the fraudsters do something different, and you've got to try and kind of capture that there.
And actually the point is from before is like them running it as an enterprise. Yes, they're running it as an enterprise, but they're not an enterprise like Mastercard. They don't have a brand to protect. They don't have regulatory scrutiny. They don't have any values that they're running by. They can try anything they want, right? So we're up against that too.
Yeah.
And look, we know Mastercard sits at the global payments ecosystem, right in the center of it. How do you approach securing something from a security perspective at such a vast level?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. So really, as I said before, we kind of started at the transaction, right? So we've been protecting transactions for decades, hence the synonymous word of trust with Mastercard, right? So when you swipe your card, you're never thinking about it. So what we have at the transaction layer is real-time fraud scoring of every single transaction on the planet in real time using like thousands of signals per transaction. So that's at scale. And then we also have what we call safety net, which is like a AI powered blanket over the network, which is able to pick up fraud that's happening at scale anywhere around the planet. If you go to our command center, you'll actually see, if fraud is happening in some market in the Middle East, you'll see that light up, and we're constantly monitoring, right? So that's at the transaction level. We then realized that actually fraud at the transaction level, because of our own models at the network level, our partners' models at the financial institutions that we work with and merchants, etc., everyone's getting more sophisticated, which is great. So fraud at the transaction level has actually been going down over the past several years. However, it's migrating, right? So it's migrating to the point where somebody's creating an account or somebody's getting a token provisioned on their device. So it's that time of account opening where we have to understand the individual, we have to understand the identity, and that's that next layer of security that we need to apply. So it's about device identity, it's about the person identity. Is this a synthetic identity? Is this a bad device? What do we understand about the device from the device footprint? And then you take it even one step further and you think about the cyber ecosystem in which us and our partners are working. And we can try to understand what are the vulnerabilities in those ecosystems and making sure that we are compensating for those vulnerabilities. And then also the next layer is threat intelligence, which we just acquired Recorded Future last year, which is a premier player in the threat intelligence space. So it's about the layers. It's about the transaction, it's about the identities and the devices, and then the cyber ecosystem as well, because that's where all the breaches are happening, right? So we're having thousands of breaches every year. All those credentials get out there and then it monetizes on the payment network, right?
So Mastercard can't do this all on their own, right? It's great what you guys are doing. How do we take this from a Mastercard perspective to a global issue that we can all work together and collaborate?
Yeah, collaboration is obviously very, very critical for us, and we collaborate with our merchant partners, we collaborate with our issuers, and I can give you a specific example of how we collaborated. Just last year, we had the Point of Interaction, which is our own conference where we bring in a whole bunch of merchants, and one of the things that they said to us was, we're really struggling with returns fraud, right? So, and it's a $50 billion problem globally. It's kind of a subset of first party fraud, if you've heard that. Yeah. And so returns fraud is kind of part of that. And so they were like, what can we do together as a network plus the merchants to kind of combat this problem? So there are some signals that merchants have that they can share with us, and we can kind of share that with the issuer, because there's a bit of information asymmetry, right? Obviously between the merchants and the issuers, and the network is a nice conduit to be able to pass that intelligence along. So this Q4 of this year, we're actually launching a return fraud risk score. Plus we changed some of our rules on the network so that now people can report return fraud, because it wasn't an actual reportable fraud type, right? So we made changes there. We're launching the return fraud score. So not only can merchants send the data, we can send that insight to the issuer. And then the issuer also knows if somebody calls and, oh, the chance of return fraud on this transaction is really high, they can question the cardholder and be like, hey.
Does advanced AI and the machine learning that can do overarch that as a product?
Absolutely. Yes, it does. Because we are using past behavior to predict whether this could become a return fraud, basically, right? So that's what we're doing, and we get those signals from our transaction data and from the data that the merchant will share with us.
And I guess a follow-up question for me on that, because we're talking about agentic commerce a lot at the conference. How does that agentic future, obviously you've had merchants come and speak to you and they're talking about fraud, but for me, agentic seems, I work in the payments industry, as most people in the room do today. But that seems like something that could almost be counterintuitive to the steps forward we've made as far as fraud prevention is concerned. So what's your thought on that?
So agentic is obviously brand new, and every week I feel like there's another new announcement on agentic, whether it's OpenAI with Stripe or Google that put out their protocol on Agent Pay protocol. So we're working with all of these industry players on agentic pay. We have our own agentic pay as well, which is based off of our tokenization framework. So you know who the agent is, it's authenticated. So that's the base. Then we also have APIs that will collect the intent of the human. So we have intent APIs that go around it as well. And then we also have consent APIs that go along with it as well to ensure that the human behind the agent is actually doing that. But to your point, while agentic opens up a lot of exciting use cases, for example, my daughter no longer needs to stay awake till 1 a.m. to buy Taylor Swift tickets. She can just have her agent to do that, right? So, which is amazing. But then you start thinking, I've been in fraud long enough, so I see all the dark circles and the dark lurking corners and all of that. But what is the liability framework around that, right? What if your agent goes rogue? Who's liable for that transaction? What if your agent gets taken over, right? Like agent takeover, like account takeover, right? Or how do you do know your agent, right? Like KYA. So those are all the concepts that we're working on to make sure that trust is embedded in agentic payments as well, because it is coming. It is going to happen. It's going to be happening at scale if it hasn't already started, right?
It always just felt like a bit counterintuitive to me, particularly putting my European payments hat on. We've got really familiar in the market with OTPs, your one-time passcodes. People are more used to using those now, mandated 3D secure. Kind of rips up the playbook a little bit on some of these things that we put in place.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, right now I was thinking about, I just sit back and think about all of these things every now and then, but like you think about it, we've so far been dealing with a good human and a bad human. But now you're almost in a 2x2. So you're like dealing with a good human, good bot, good agent, bad agent, and then you've got this 2x2. And each one of those permutations could lead to all sorts of different things. So it has changed the paradigm, to your point, and it's something that we're working very closely because we think there's exciting possibilities as long as the right guardrails are in place.
I think it's quite interesting. We look at cybersecurity and using AI as a tool, which is fantastic, but it's also a risk because we know that fraudsters are using cybersecurity AI, right, to do the exact opposite of what we're trying to get them to do in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah.
Should we talk a little bit then about collective resilience as well? Because I know that's something that you're quite passionate about, and I'd love to get your take on the collaboration that's going on between banks, fintechs, governments, and merchants in that space at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. One example that can bring it to life is scams, right? So scams is something where many times it's authorized push payment, right, is what's resulting in the scam, and there's a lot involved in that. And this is one specifically where, when you talk about scams, governments, other entities are very involved, and there are associations like the Global Anti-Scam Alliance, which is, I think, a great organization. We're part of it, along with several of our peers as well. And it is an area that really does require a lot of collaboration, because many times the person that's actually scammed is embarrassed about it, right? Like they're like, oh, how did that happen to me? And many times they don't even report it because they don't know what the recourse is. They don't know how to even go about getting their money back or what they can even do, knowing that they might have been scammed on an investment scam, or it could have been a romance scam or any other type of scam, right? So that is a perfect area for people to collaborate, and governments, nations, we're collaborating, where the networks are collaborating as well, and the financial institutions. Now, I know in the UK, this has been a big thing, and there is kind of like a split liability, so we're kind of monitoring how that works. We don't have that here in the US, but sometimes things like that can actually help to fuel innovation and fuel collaboration, which is really critical. For many years, we've been talking about, sharing of consortium data. And while there are several examples of things, I think more needs to be done there, to be honest.
We can stand in our own way with data sharing sometimes as well. I mean, we have GDPR in the UK, and there's this question mark, I guess, if you're a government organisation, again, very precious about the data that sits within
Right.
their ecosystem. So like leaning into how we best collaborate in a fair and trustworthy way, but also not breaching those policies that we have internally.
Correct, exactly. I think everyone gets very kind of, a little bit uncomfortable when you talk about sharing data. But again, let's keep in mind, and I think I know of many consortiums where, data is being shared at that consortium level and it's useful. But I think part of the problem is there are many, right? So it still creates these silos of data and things like that, which isn't helpful ultimately at the end of the day. I think we really need a step change in the way that data is shared, because the criminal rings, they're sharing, right? So we have to be sharing in order to be able to combat them. And I think we will get to a point where that will be the way that we will need to get better, because if something is happening in one particular financial institution or multiple, chances are it's gonna spread, right? So the sooner we have that data and we have that information, and the sooner we can put defenses in place, the better, because we're all fighting against a common enemy at that point.
And I think the piece there as well is when we talk about the data, it's that different businesses within that ecosystem need different pieces of that data.
Right.
So sometimes you're taking all this data and consuming that, but you don't need all of that. So you're trying to kind of decipher through what you do need from that data to make a decision within your own engine. I think, how does then Mastercard then share them best practices, do you think, with the wider ecosystem?
Yeah, so we are always participating in many different forums. We participate at the industry level to set protocols. Like, for example, Agent Pay, you brought that up before. Like I said, there's a lot to be worked out with Agent Pay, and we are on at least 10, 15 different industry forums and working directly with partners like Google and Microsoft and others that are heavily focused in that. So that's from a standard setting perspective, because obviously we have a large franchise and we have rules around how this works. And we also work with another entity called EMVCo to set the standards. Then when it comes to actually developing solutions, we work very closely with our merchant partners, our small businesses, because small businesses are many times left out or they're very underserved, right? Yet they are the backbone of most economies around the world. So
we need more inclusive tools, you think?
Many more inclusive tools, and being able to, whatever data insights that we get and we're sharing, making sure that that's actually helping them so that they're not left behind in this game, right? So that's the other piece of it. And then we also participate in several consortia as well to kind of share best practices and data.
So looking ahead, what do we think comes next when it comes to cyber resilience? Kind of what's the next phase?
Good question. This is the crystal ball question. So I think agentic, where despite the fact that we're talking about AI and agentic all the time, I feel like just being in this industry, we're still very, very early on in this whole journey with agentic. So I think there's a lot more to come there, to the point where it's scaled and being used by consumers at scale. I think there's a lot more to be done for that to happen. Yes, today we're using it just to get some recommendations and stuff, but at the point where it's autonomously buying for you or doing tasks for you, I think we're still getting there. So that's, I think, one trend that you will see a lot of advancement in the next couple of years. The other one that I think you'll see a lot of is probably a lot of advancements around quantum resistant, because we know quantum's coming. It's the next kind of frontier. They've been saying that for a while, but now I'm starting to see a lot more happening there. And I'm also starting to see a lot of startups and other companies kind of focused on quantum resistant technology, which is good. And then I think we'll also end up seeing a lot more, from a cyber perspective particularly, a lot more innovation in the zero trust architectures, right? So those are, I think we'll start seeing a lot more innovations there as well. And all of those things are good for cyber.
And if you were then to pull out one high level, your go-to tip for all organizations out there as far as protecting themselves, what would that be?
I think you need to invest in very sophisticated AI if you haven't done so already. We know a lot of companies and a lot of institutions are doing that, but you need to continue to invest, because think about agentic, right? It could change the paradigm and shift everything, because all this time we kept saying, oh, bots are bad, right? Because they were the bad bots. But now I could have a perfectly good bot trying to buy a Taylor Swift ticket for my daughter. You don't want to you don't want to shy that bot away, right? Because you want it's going to drive business. So I think those types of paradigm shifts are going to happen. So you're going to have to get ready for that. So just because you've invested in AI doesn't mean you can just kind of sit on the laurels. You need to continue to evolve as the kind of ecosystem
Such a
is
flooded
evolving.
market, though, isn't it? I mean, it's great advice, but at the same time, it's just so many brands, so many startup companies. Even SMBs are getting hammered every single day with come use our AI for this, come use our AI for that. How do you kind of cut through the noise?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things that you have to focus on as a company is focus on your key strategic value that you're providing your customers. If that can be enhanced by AI and you determine how that can be enhanced by AI, go for it, invest in it. Build the infrastructure to measure the success of that investment from the ground up. Build the infrastructure to be able to scale that from the ground up, and build the security infrastructure and the governance around it to be able to monitor that as well from the ground up. I think if you did that, you'd be in a good spot.
And other than your daughter going to watch Taylor Swift, what excites you the most over the next couple of years of the future?
I think the potential with AI and agents is amazing. It's going to change the way I think we operate, how we work, potentially even in the workplace. I think that's quite exciting. I can see a future where as managers, we're managing a workforce of agents and humans, with the thought of the agents augmenting the human workforce, right? Because there's a very big human element here that we cannot forget. But I think that it opens up a lot of exciting possibilities as well.
Skynet's here. It's creeping in, isn't it? Look, thank you so much for joining us today. We have got one final section. I'm not sure if you've watched our show in the past, but we have an end item called the Shelf of Shame, where our guests nominate something that, call it a payments ick or a business ick, if you like. Something that really grinds your gears that you can nominate to put on the Shelf of Shame, never to return again.
As much as I hate to say it, passwords are still used, and I know my parents use them, and I know many people use them, and we've been talking about for decades we have to kill passwords, but we haven't done it yet. And I would love to see a world where there's literally no password. I just looked on informationisbeautiful.com. I don't know if you've seen that website, but password 12345 is still the most prevalent password, which blows my mind after 2 decades in security. But
has everyone in this room got a question mark or an exclamation mark in a lot of their passwords as well, if we're being honest? No?
I don't think we have a choice anymore, right? You've got to be in the most obscure kind of password. To the point you forget it most of the time anyway, so you're hoping your safe key can save you every time, right? So let's just get rid of it altogether.
Just
make
get
life
rid
a
of
bit
it.
easier.
We don't need it.
100%
I
endorse that
agree.
going into the Shelf of Shame.
Never to return.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people get in touch with you if they want to find out more about what you do at Mastercard?
They can email me at Ranjita, Ranjita.Iyer, Iyer at mastercard.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ranjita.
Thank you.